Hello, everyone. Today I'm speaking to Oran Kivity, the son of Ruth Jordan, who wrote the book, the autobiography called Daughter of the Waves. Actually, that was the English translation of The Town of Bat Gillam, I believe, and it was originally published in the early 80s. It was an award-winning book, and it was about her life growing up in pre-war Palestine. I found her childhood memories sometimes humorous, other times a very innocent look at events of the day. And I want to ask you, Oran, first thing I thought of as a child, and I don't know whether she introduced you to this or not, but she talks about Christmas crackers and the ride on top of a coffin. Had she talked to you about that?
No, she hadn't talked to me about the Christmas crackers, but of course I had read the book when it was first published in 1980, and I kind of asked her about certain things about it. The thing that I remember most clearly that we shared was she describes in the book where she was lying under a tree and she had the illusion that she was flying. And I had that same illusion myself as a child, that I was able to fly. And I told her about it. And then she kind of shared it with me. And then I found it in the book later as an adult when I read the book. So we both had this strange illusion as children that we could fly. And I imagined myself kind of floating through the sitting room, and she imagined herself floating around this tree.
That's amazing. And you followed in her steps as a writer. I wonder how many more similarities there are between your mother and you. I think that's interesting. On a more serious note, she wrote about visiting a remote part of Mount Carmel called the Trees of the 40. Did she ever explain to you what the 40 was?
I can't remember that part of the book. And I think that's going to be my problem, kind of talking about Mum and the book, is there's obviously I don't know the material as well as she did, because
of course not. I understand. Yeah. I understand. One of the things that I was amazed at was the difference between her mother and her father, your grandmother and your grandfather. In the book, she talks about her mother being born in Lithuania and living very well with silver and cut glass and maids. And I understand she became a linguist and spoke German and French and Latin and Russian and Hebrew. But from what I read, her father grew up with no central water supply, had wells and hand pumps, and the children had to work the pumps. And I wondered, how did her mother and father meet and connect? Did you ever ask about that?
Right. Yeah. I think that her mum came from Lithuania, and she had studied in Geneva. And then when she moved to Palestine, to British Palestine as it was then she wasn't wealthy. And I think she got a job as the teacher in her husband-to-be's school. So they met and they were both teaching together. And as you say, she was very erudite, and she was, extraordinarily accomplished for a woman of her age. That her education was quite remarkable. And my granddad was also a very accomplished person. He was a biologist, and actually there's a college named after him in Haifa.
Yeah.
And he was third generation, so his family had moved there from Moravia, I think, which is now the Czech Republic, sometime in the early 19th century.
It seemed like your mother followed in a lot of those footsteps as well. She was quite educated. She learned very quickly. She could speak several languages. So she seemed to have followed. I wondered, I kind of was amazed at how she learned how to read at the beginning, when she talked about, in place of making those cardboard elephants, she didn't want to make them in kindergarten. Do you remember how she learned how to read? How her mother taught her?
It's quite interesting that you should say that, because her mum realized that she was very backward with her letters. So she cut out little letters and got them to, so she basically cut them out of paper and made them, shaped them. And then they would play with these letters and said, did you know that that spells donkey? Did you know that that spells dog? And so she went from very low in her class to top of the class. But I have a personal anecdote, because that's what my mum did with me. Because when I was 4, we moved to Israel, and when I was 5, they decided that they wanted to go back to the UK where they'd met, and that they preferred the UK. So at that point, I was very confused, because I spoke some Hebrew and I spoke some English. So I remember my mum cutting out the alphabet in little paper characters and saying, do you know what these 3 letters spell? It spells dog. That was in English. And so she educated me in exactly the same way as her mom had educated her.
That's amazing.
And yeah, I was the recipient of that. And later my mom would teach illiterate adults in the UK. That was one of the things that she did. And I think that she got that from her mom, who also taught people to read all the time. So yeah, a lot of little parallels.
It is. That's interesting. I enjoyed looking at how that happened. I understand from reading that when your mom was only 8 years old, she contracted typhus and was treated by the Sisters of Mercy. Did she ever tell you about that experience, what that was like as a little child?
No, if she did, I don't recall. But I do remember that she had pleurisy as an adult, and that she was on medication for some considerable time. I thought it was TB, but my sister tells me it was pleurisy. So both of us remember it differently, but she was on meds for a long time. But I don't remember what it was like for her as ever talking about that experience as a child.
Isn't that interesting? I know that her father had several pets, and some of them, your grandfather, and some of them were exotic as well. And she found a few of them quite interesting. Had she shared any of that with you?
Yeah, she talked a lot about her pet hyena. And there's a whole chapter about Boka. Boka in Hebrew apparently means come and get it. So he was called Boka because he was brought as a puppy and he grew up into a hyena. And he became quite the phenomenon, and lots of Arabs would come to pick up his stools, because his stools apparently, hyena stools apparently had some healing properties, and particularly with infertility. So he was around for a couple of years, but he broke free from his kind of pen at one point, and he got shot by a policeman who thought he was a wild hyena.
I saw that. Yes, that was crazy. I also was amused by the locust and the Mitzi the cat and what happened in that sofa. I mean, there are so many humorous stories about that like I said, I could stop at any one of those stories. It was just very different. It isn't always that your parent has a hyena. Go ahead.
I think that one of the things that I love about the book, and I loved about my mum, was her sense of humor. And all the time you see this kind of very, very humorous child, and very precocious child. Yes. And there's and she's just quite funny. And there are some scenes. I think there's a scene where there's this English boy who's trying to court her and saying, "Oh, I'm going to take you home to be my wife." She said, "Well, why would I want to be your wife?" And he's saying, "Well, then I would look after you." So, "Well, why would I want you to look after me?" And it's just a very amusing scene. And this guy's got pomaded, slick back hair, and he's wearing kind of very dandy clothes. I wonder now whether he was gay. I'm not sure, but
interesting.
Yeah, it was a very funny kind of anecdote. But the book is full of these funny little stories.
It is. It just goes on and on. And then one thing I found interesting was the story of her parents' divorce and how people around her explained her father's absence. it was like no one said they're divorced.
That's
They
right.
said he was traveling, or I wondered, I don't think I got this in the book, but I wondered exactly when did she realize it was a divorce. She went to visit him with the other woman, and I try to figure out when did she figure that out? I don't know.
That I'm not quite sure of either, because and she hasn't talked much about her parents' divorce, not to me at least, maybe perhaps more to my sister. But there was this sense that it was a tremendous shock when she really found out, because they gave her these excuses like, he's a biologist and he needs to work, so he's moved to this American woman's house to work harder, and he can do his study there and not be disturbed. So there was this sense that he was too busy, and that was what the separation was about. And then I think it's one of the stories, one of her classmates says, "Oh, your parents are divorced," and she's really shocked, and she finds out about it from a contemporary, and then then she finds out the truth, and it's a tremendous shock to her.
Yes, and I found out that in some of her sense of humor, I thought she put into the fact that he was just working, and at some point that she was covering herself for him. But one of the things she wrote about was the Arab revolt to stop the Jewish immigration in 1936. I even wonder how she would describe what's going on today. And I wonder, when you and your sister decided to republish the book, it was before the October 7th attack. Have you heard any feedback from families or people who might have read a copy of Daughter of the Waves in comparison?
That's an interesting question. We've not had any feedback from family who've read the book in relation to that. But I think that the book is timeless because it describes a time which, depending on your narrative, is a period of Jewish colonization of an Arab entity, or a decolonization project, which is Jews who lived there, who kind of were having this tremendous sense of excitement at this idea of being back home. So there's I think, of course, at the time that we decided to republish the book, I just thought, well, it's 40 years since the anniversary. It will be 40 years. Let's try and publish it, after 40 years. But it became much, much more relevant after October the 7th, because it describes a period which in many ways was much less extreme than now, where her father speaks Arabic. He's respected by the Arabic community. He talks to them. They come to him for all kinds of advice. They come to give him their stray animals and their lost animals, and he's respected, and he's a teacher. But at the same time, there's a kind of segregation, and she's very aware that there's an Arab woman at her class at university who drops out, who no one ever talked to, and who kept herself to herself, and then she has the sense of difference from Arab women she meets on the train, who keep saying who befriend her and give her sweets, and then they're saying to her, when are you going to get married? Why aren't you married yet? And she said, well, I'm only 14. So there's that. I think it's a less conflicted time. It's a less polarized time that she describes.
She does. And she did talk about the white papers of 1930. And I understand that gave her first introduction to the complexities of the Arab-Jewish conflict and Britain's part in it, actually.
There was a tremendous ambivalence to the British, because the British were seen as allies, or natural allies at one point, and the British, particularly though she doesn't describe the war years in any great detail, the British stopped the German invasion of Palestine at El Alamein, which is this pivotal battle between the British army and the German army. So the British were kind of seen as good, but then they were seen as bad because they restricted Jewish immigration.
Right.
And for the Jews living in Palestine, my mum was painfully aware that there were persecutions in Germany. So she was 100% in favor of those refugees being allowed to land. And the British at that point had flipped their policy at that white paper that she talks about. And they said, well, we're going to really restrict Jewish immigration. And eventually, after 5 years, we're going to cut it off completely. So there was this ambivalence. Like, they wanted the British, they liked the British, they respected the British. In fact, her first husband was a British RAF pilot. And then they also were against the British because the British were restricting immigration.
Her stories just go on and on. I remember the flying camel and the cyclist from Palestine to London to raise money to build that sports stadium in Palestine, and more. But I was also fascinated by her description of herself. I mean, she talks about at one point having protruded front teeth, which made it difficult to close her mouth. I mean, how many people would be open enough to talk about that? And yet I know that she eventually was an anchor on the air and with the BBC. But at that point, she talks about that. She wrote a novel. She translated short stories and won all these awards. What was she like as a mother? I know she wasn't, or somewhere I read that she wasn't a great cook, except for that eggplant. And I understand that she was told that she had to be able to make it many different ways. Did she ever make eggplant for you?
She did. Yeah, she was really good at cooking eggplant. And that was one of my favorite dishes, I must say. And she made really good egg mayonnaise as well. That's another dish that she did really well.
She did.
But I would say that her reputation in the family was not for being a great cook. Let's put it that way.
Somewhere I got that impression.
Yeah, because it was something, Mum was, she, for many years, she was self-employed. She was a writer. And she was really, really focused on her work. So cooking was something that she did because she loved us, but she did it to get it out of the way. She wanted to feed us so that she could get back to her typewriter. And so she was a very loving mom, but it was very clear that her she was really focused on work. And she,
her priority.
I would hear the typewriter clacking away late into the night when I was a kid. And also, she was amazing as a journalist. I think your readers won't know. I think, at the end of the book, we put in a small biography of her, like what she did after the events of the book, because the events of the book closed basically at the end of the Second World War, 1945, when she moved to the UK. She moved to London,
Right.
And then she started working for the BBC in London, and she remained there for many years. And then she quit her job as a BBC. She kept it as a journalist, but she started writing historical biographies and biographies of famous women. And then eventually that led her into biographies of other people like Chopin and Halavi. As a kid, I remember that because of the time difference, she was working for Israel Radio. So she would often get a call at 1 or 2 in the morning, and I would hear the phone go off. She'd sit up, she'd do her broadcast into the phone, she'd put the phone down, and then she'd go back to sleep. So she was like completely comfortable with that kind of thing. And I would stay awake afterwards going, wow, I would listen to the whole broadcast and then I couldn't get back to sleep, but she could just, wake up, pick up the phone, do her broadcast, put the phone down and go back to sleep. She was amazing in that regard.
Do you think that she was responsible for your interest in writing? Now, I know you write nonfiction, correct?
I write nonfiction, and I edit as well. And my sister also edits and is very proud of her language and very skillful with language. So I think we got our writing gene from her, and we got our editing gene from both our parents. My dad was very good at editing. He was a journalist as well. So, but I think, yeah, I get my writing gene from her, and you will often hear me tapping away on my computer late into the night in the same way. So I think we mimic our parents in various ways, and I'm very focused on writing.
You do, I know. What do you think, if you had to say one thing about the book? I mean, I can't say one thing about the book because it's so many things. I think there's so much culture in there between her love of music, and I mean, even as a young child, where she wanted to play the piano, and her parents couldn't afford it. They I guess a violin was what they gave her, and so she always had a love of that kind of area in her life. Did she play the piano as an adult?
She had a piano and she encouraged us to play it, and she played a little bit, but she wasn't passionate about it by that stage. By the time we were around, then she could still play the piano, but it wasn't something that she did. She did it to help us practice, but she didn't do it to, out of joy of playing the piano, I think. If there's one thing that I found fascinating, it's the sense of burgeoning culture and the stories of the Palestine Orchestra and Toscanini coming to town, and the excitement of Toscanini conducting, and all these different musicians from different countries being kind of melded under Toscanini into one orchestra. And this tremendous excitement about these performances. Also, there was Golenkin and the Palestine Opera. And there were so many. So it was just this kind of flourishing of culture. All these, as these Europeans came to British Palestine, then you could just see all this culture growing and growing and growing, and the sense of identity. And so I think that was for me what was most amazing about it, because I think we believe that Israel was founded in 1948. So, I mean, that's historically when it was. And then all of these things developed then after that. But actually, you see all these things developing in the 20s, the 30s. So I think that's what's amazing for me. It's just that rich, flourishing, growing culture. And that's the lovely thing, as you see my mum as a child kind of growing and swelling with all this culture and love of culture and love. She was translating from French and from English into Hebrew. So,
she didn't even realize how she was affected, I don't think.
No.
It just happened. She just, her interests were so diverse. I mean, she loved the humor in what she saw, and she loved the culture. And then I think she was a very smart woman.
Yeah, I think so. She was obviously a very precocious child, and slightly annoying with her questions. You can see when she talks about these little dialogues, and she hears about Latin. So what's Latin? It's a dead language. What's a dead language?
Right.
What? And she keeps asking questions, and kind of charming and annoying. And she was referred to as the little savage, I think, by some of her neighbors, because she was always running around naked on the beach. Yeah, that's right.
I didn't read that.
Yeah. For your viewers or your listeners, Bat Galim is the area of Haifa. It's the beach on Haifa, and it literally means in Hebrew, daughter of the waves. And because she grew up on that beach, then she took that Bat Galim as the name of her book in English, as Daughter of the Waves.
Daughter of the Waves.
She was just this little girl running around naked on the beach. A little savage, and then growing up and as a teenager, translating all these things from French into Hebrew and from English into Hebrew. Bless her.
I think it lends itself to a series on television. I think, or a streaming series. I mean, like I said, each chapter is almost a half-hour special, just about her life and how. Sometimes she didn't even realize how important what she was saying would be.
Yeah, well, that hadn't crossed my mind, but yeah, it would be a lovely TV series, wouldn't it?
It wouldn't it? Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
would. I really think it would. So you want to tell me what you're writing?
Oh, well, I'm an acupuncturist, so I write books about acupuncture with a focus on Japanese acupuncture styles.
Ah,
And so, yeah, I write nonfiction. I write books about acupuncture. But because of the self-publishing experience, I've kind of got into publishing other authors as well and helping them to publish their books. And it was, I think it was that kind of led me then to have the chutzpah to republish Mum's book. And it was also, yeah, it was a way to bring the family together because, you know, my dad was in Israel with my stepmom, his second wife, and she has dementia. So, and he was in his 90s and finding it very hard to cope, particularly during the pandemic. And my sister was in the UK and very isolated during the pandemic. And I was needed to move country during the pandemic, like close our business in Malaysia and move to Taiwan. So it was a way to bring the family together after the kind of isolation of the pandemic.
Oh, nice, actually. And is your sister a writer as well?
She doesn't publish books, but she's a very astute editor and proofreader, and she used to manage art festivals, and so she was always writing the copy for the arts festivals.
So yeah, so your mom's talents have just gone right on with you and your sister.
Very much so.
Yeah, that's definitely the case. So let me ask you, I know that for our audience that they're kind of used to going to Novels and Latte on Facebook and being able to listen to one of our interviews and write a few facts about it and enter into a competition to win a book that we're talking about. So I know that that's a possibility, but other than that, can you tell our audience how they can get a copy and or how they can get in touch with you if you want to give some information out? I do know that your one email doesn't work, right? You found that out, right?
Right.
I think it's, I don't know if it's a Gmail or if it's something, but there is one that works. But what is the contact information for the audience to get that? Where can they buy them?
Okay, so of course you can go to your local bookshop and ask for Daughter of the Waves, Memories of Growing Up in Pre-War Palestine by Ruth Jordan, and they can order it for you, or you can get it on Amazon, or you can come to my website, which is orankivity.com, and we have a page, I think it's orankivity.com, DOTW. Yeah, orankivity.com/DOTW. So maybe
Daughter of the Waves.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Got it now.
Yeah. So, and you can contact me via the website.
Well, that's good. Well, I sure appreciate your time. And I think what you've done would make your mother proud. And I hope that many people get a chance to read this book because, like I said, there's something in it for just about everyone. And maybe someday I'll be watching streaming and it will be a series. And I will I will contact you, your sister.
Carol, thank you so much for this interview. I've really enjoyed it. It's really nice to talk about my mum, and I hope that readers get a chance to know her better too. So thank you very much.
So do I. Thank you very much. And till next time, everyone, it's Carol O'Neill, and this is Online for Authors.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.